The loneliest I have ever been was the night I had everything. $300 billion. A room at the top of the world. Women who looked at me like I was the answer to something they'd been asking their whole lives. Not one of them ever asked what I was afraid of. That's what no one tells you. That being wanted and being known are two entirely different things, and you can spend 3 centuries confusing one for the other without ever noticing the difference. I thought I could strip it all away and finally see clearly. No money, no name, no 300 years of power pressing down on every room I walked into. What I didn't know was that the woman who would see me clearly first wasn't looking for anything I could offer. She was just trying to keep 22 children fed. If you've ever been surrounded and still felt alone, if you've ever wondered whether anyone would stay if there were nothing left to stay for, you're in the right place. Pull up a chair. This one's for you. And if stories like this find something in you that needed finding, subscribing means they'll always know where to reach you. Priscilla Holt had been managing my affairs since before the United States was a country, and she delivered bad news the way good furniture absorbs sound, completely without comment, as though the feeling had simply gone somewhere else. She was sitting across from me in the back of the car, both hands folded in her lap, the city moving past the rain-streaked windows behind her. She had not looked out those windows once. She had been looking at me for 11 minutes in the way she always looked at me when she had decided to say the thing I would not want to hear. Vivian, she said, was employed by the Moreau family before she came to you. We confirmed it this morning. I did not respond. She had access to the Harrisburg accounts for 4 months. The transfers were small enough to avoid flagging, until they weren't. Outside, Harrisburg passed in gray and wet. A church with a broken gutter spilling water down its face. A bus stop where a man stood absolutely still in the rain, not even hunching against it, the way people stand when they have run out of the energy to mind. This is the 3rd time, Priscilla said. I am aware. Vivian. Before her, Renata. Before her, the one whose name you have asked me not to say in your presence. She paused. Not for effect. Priscilla had no interest in effect. She paused because she was precise, and precision required space. Each of them saw what you had. None of them saw you. And each time, you let them closer than the last. Another pause. You are becoming someone who cannot be known. That is not safety. That is decay. The car stopped at a light. On the corner, a woman in a yellow raincoat was arguing with an umbrella that had turned inside out, and she was losing, and she knew it, and she kept going anyway. I watched her until the light changed. I had been lied to before Vivian. I had been lied to before Renata. I had been lied to so many times and in so many centuries that the lying had become a kind of wallpaper. Always there, unremarkable, just the surface of the room I lived in. What Vivian had done differently was this. She had sat across from me at a table in Philadelphia in November, and she had looked at me with an expression that I had allowed myself to believe was recognition. The particular look of someone who sees past the money and the name and the 300 years of control damage and finds something worth staying for. There had been a recording device taped beneath the table. I found it 6 weeks later, which meant the look on her face had kept me warm for 6 weeks. That was the part one could not let go of. Not the betrayal, the warmth. The specific 6 weeks of believing something that was not true. I gave myself 1 week to change my mind. I did not change my mind. The identity took 9 days to build. I chose the name Jason Tyler. Plain, forgettable, the name of a man who has never made anything happen. I found a room in a Harrisburg row house on a block where the houses leaned against each other like men at the end of a long shift. The landlord was 63 and suspicious of everyone, which meant he was suspicious of no one in particular, which meant I was safe. I paid 2 months in cash, and he did not ask questions. Priscilla stood in the doorway of a room. The morning I moved in, and looked at the water stain on the ceiling and the window that didn't quite close and the single bare bulb overhead, and said nothing for a long time. 3 months, I said. I was sitting on the edge of the bed, lacing up the work boots I had bought secondhand from a church sale on State Street. They were a size too wide, and the left sole had a crack running along the heel. No contact except emergencies. No resources beyond what Jason Tyler earns. No intervention. And if someone recognizes you, no one will recognize me. She looked at me the way she had looked at me for 700 years, with the patience of someone who has learned that arguing with me is a project that outlasts most human lifespans. You are doing this, she said finally, because it hurts less to run an experiment than to admit you are lonely. She left before I could answer. The room was quiet. The bulb overhead made a sound that was almost nothing, a faint, persistent hum that you wouldn't notice unless the room was very still. The window let in a strip of cold air and the smell of wet pavement and something frying in the apartment below. I sat with the boots in my hands for a moment. 3 centuries of empire. 3 centuries of rooms that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime, of women who looked at me and saw the answer to their particular problem, of a world that moved when I moved and stopped when I stopped. 3 centuries of being the most powerful presence in any room I entered. I put the boots on. The mop was leaning against the wall by the door where I'd left it. My first shift at the office complex on Hearst Street started at 6 in the morning. It was currently 4:47. I looked at the mop. The mop did not look back. Something was happening in my face. I could feel it without being able to name it. Not peace. Not relief. Something rawer than either of those things. The particular alertness of a man who has stopped pretending he isn't lost and has decided, for the first time in a very long time, to pay attention to where he actually is. I stood up. Outside, Harrisburg was still raining. The first thing I learned about being nobody was that it had a smell. Mop water and floor stripper, and the particular staleness of an office building at 6 in the morning, when the overnight cleaning crew has just left and the daytime people haven't arrived yet, and the whole place exists in a kind of suspended fluorescent indifference. I pushed the mop down the 3rd floor hallway of the Hearst Street complex, and the wheels squeaked on every 4th rotation. And no one had fixed them, and no one was going to fix them, because fixing the wheels on a janitor's mop cart was the kind of thing that required someone to first notice that a janitor existed. I had not been invisible since the 17th century. It was different than I remembered. Back then, invisibility had been a tool, something I wore deliberately, moved through, set aside when I was done with it. This was not that. This was the bus driver who looked through me when I tapped my card. I was already moving to the next fare before I cleared the step. The woman at the front desk of the complex who handed me a replacement mop head without looking up from her phone, the way you hand a tissue to someone without looking at them. The coworker who asked on my 3rd day whether I spoke English and then answered a text message before I could respond and walked away and never thought about it again. 300 years of being the most dangerous presence in any room. The mop will squeaked. I gave the experiment 2 weeks before I added the second variable. A dating profile, free tier, because Jason Tyler could not afford the premium features, and the premium features were the ones that let you see who had already liked you, which meant Jason Tyler was reaching into the dark and hoping. The photo I used was the one Priscilla had taken outside the row house. Work jacket, no smile, the particular flatness of a man who does not know what he is supposed to be performing for a camera. The results were educational. A woman named Daphne matched with me on a Tuesday. She asked what I did. I told her. She said that sounded hard, which is what people say when they mean something else. She unmatched on Wednesday. A woman named Rochelle agreed to meet for coffee. She was warm and quick and laughed at the right moments, and we talked for 40 minutes about a documentary we had both seen, and it was the most genuine conversation I had managed in weeks. Then the check came. I counted exact change from my jacket pocket because Jason Tyler counted exact change because Jason Tyler always knew to the dollar what he had, and something in her face recalibrated. Not cruelty, adjustment. The small, automatic arithmetic of a woman who has learned to do it fast and without ceremony. She said she had forgotten something, and she hadn't, and she did not respond to the message I sent the following morning. A woman named Frida was the honest one. She sat across from me at a diner on Forster Street and looked at the word jacket and the $12 watch and said, with the directness of someone who respects her own time, "I need someone who is building towards something. You seem like you're just getting by." She was not wrong about Jason Tyler. She did not know she was wrong about me. There was no way to explain the distinction. So I thanked her for the coffee and walked out into the November air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, feeling the cold work its way through a jacket that was not warm enough for it. 3 centuries. This was what it had cost every woman who had ever chosen me. Nothing. Not one of them had ever needed to count change in front of me. Not one of them had ever watched my face and recalibrated. Not one of them had ever chosen to stay without first doing the math and deciding the math was favorable. I had known this in the abstract. Now I knew it in the body, which is different, which is the only way knowing actually sticks. It was a Thursday evening, the 4th week, the sky doing that late November thing where it goes dark at 5, and the streets smell like wet concrete and something burning from house somewhere, when I saw her. She came out of the side entrance of a church on Verbeke Street, carrying what appeared to be 4 bags of groceries and a folding table. Not with help, not looking around for it, with the focused, load-bearing efficiency of a woman who has learned that waiting for someone to offer is a luxury she cannot afford. She was heavy-set, moving carefully on the uneven sidewalk, and she shifted the table under her arm and adjusted her grip on the bags without breaking stride. The small, constant negotiations of a body that has learned to work with the world as it actually is, not as it was designed. A man walking past her moved to the outside edge of the pavement. Not to make room, to create distance. The way you adjust your path around a parked car. She did not watch him do it. She already knew. She loaded everything into the back of a dented green hatchback. Hip against the bumper to hold the door, bags first, then the table angled in at the precise angle that cleared the frame. And she did it alone, and she got it done, and she got in and drove away. I stood on the sidewalk outside the laundromat across the street with a gas station sandwich going cold in my hand. The experiment was supposed to be about me, about whether anyone could see past the absence of money to the man underneath. That had been the question, clean and contained, the kind of question a controlled mind asks when it wants to feel like it's being brave. The question was getting complicated. I did not go looking for her. I want to be clear about that because the rest of what happened is complicated enough that it matters where this part started. I did not engineer an introduction. I did not calculate an approach. I was walking down Verbeke Street 4 days after I'd watched her load that hatchback, taking a different route to the bus stop for no reason I could have named, and a child materialized at my elbow. 7 years old, approximately. Braided hair coming loose on one side. A jacket that was too light for the temperature, worn with the complete indifference of a child who has more pressing things to track than being cold. "You go to the church?" she said. I looked at the church. I had not been going to the church. "Is there something at the church?" "Dinner." She said the way you'd say obviously. Miss Jenner makes sure nobody goes home hungry. A pause, in which she appeared to assess whether I was the kind of person who already knew things or the kind who needed them explained. She reached a verdict. "The macaroni is the good kind, with the breadcrumbs." Her name was Marisol. She told me this without being asked, along with the information that she was in 2nd grade, that her teacher smelled like mothballs, and that the folding table by the door sometimes had a wobbly leg, but you had to act normal about it or Miss Jenner would feel bad. I followed her in. The church basement smelled like warm butter and something underneath it. Old wood, maybe the particular density of a room that has held a lot of people over a long time. Folding tables in 2 rows. Plastic chairs mismatched by color, but arranged with precision. A menu board near the kitchen door, written in a child's handwriting. The letters large and careful, each item underlined once. A boy of about 11 was standing in front of it with his hands clasped behind his back, reading it with the focused attention of someone reviewing a briefing document. "Confirmed," he said, to no one in particular. The kitchen door was propped open. Through it I could see a woman moving between the stove and the counter with the unhurried efficiency of someone who has done this enough times that the work has become muscle memory. A ladle in one hand, a dish towel over her shoulder, a phone wedged between her ear and her collarbone while she stirred. She was heavy set, wearing a dark green pullover with a fraying hem, and she was talking to someone on the phone about a delivery that had come in short, and her voice was even not angry, with the particular flatness of a woman who has learned that getting loud costs more than it returns. She had not seen me yet. I pulled out a chair at the end of the nearest table and sat down. Marisol materialized beside me immediately with a plastic cup of water, set it down, and left without comment. The boy by the menu board, Theo, I would learn, said confirmed one more time, apparently satisfied, and took his seat. The food came out on a rolling cart. Macaroni, the good kind, with the breadcrumbs alongside green beans and cornbread and a side of something in a slow cooker that turned out to be chicken in a sauce that tasted like someone's grandmother had made it, which I later learned was the point. She found a recipe in a box of donated cookbooks and adjusted it until it tasted like memory rather than obligation. She moved through the room the way people move when they're doing 3 things simultaneously and have made peace with that being the permanent condition of their life. Checking plates, adjusting the slow cooker, crouching down to say something to a small boy near the window who had gone very quiet. She went still first before she crouched, just for a breath, the way you stop before reaching for something you're afraid of dropping. Then she spoke to him in a voice too low for me to hear, and he nodded, and she tucked a napkin under the edge of his plate so it wouldn't slide. I watched this from the end of the table and did not touch my food for longer than was reasonable. The tray went down at the end of dinner, one of the folding legs giving out exactly as Marisol had warned, the whole thing listing hard to the right, the stack of empty plates on it beginning to slide. I was closer to it than anyone. I got a hand under the near edge before anything fell. She was there a second later, steadying the other side. We looked at each other across the table, not the way Daphne or Rochelle or Frida had looked at me, assessing resources, calculating distance. She looked at me the way you look at a stranger who has just done something unexpected, and you're not yet sure what it means, and you're not going to decide until you have more information. Not gratitude. Assessment. Who is this person? What do they want? Thank you, she said. The words were correct. The eyes were still asking. I set the tray down properly, both legs locked and straightened up. She was already moving back toward the kitchen, one hand on the door, half her attention returned to the rolling cart and whatever needed doing next. She did not ask my name. She did not linger. The basement filled back up with the noise of children leaving. Chairs scraping, jackets zipped, Marisol telling someone authoritatively that the macaroni had been better than last week. I stayed until the room was mostly empty, until the overhead lights made the whole space feel like a stage set with no one left to perform for. The question she hadn't asked was still in the air. I had been in rooms with kings and criminals, and people who believed their own mythology so completely they had forgotten where it started. I had been looked at with fear and reverence and the specific greed of people who want what you have and are working out the best angle of approach. That look, careful, unhurried, unconvinced, I had not seen before. I walked back out into the cold, and my mind was doing something I did not immediately recognize. It was paying attention. I went back the next evening. I told myself it was the macaroni. That was the story I gave myself on the walk over, and I kept it intact all the way to the church steps, where she was standing in the cold with her keys in one hand and a stack of papers on her arm, locking up, and she turned and saw me and did not look surprised. That was the first thing I noticed. She had the face of a woman who has long since stopped being surprised by what the day sends her. "You're back," she said. "The cornbread," I said. A pause. "We didn't have cornbread tonight." I was hoping. Something moved in her expression. Not a smile, not quite, but the thing that lives just next to one. She looked at me for a moment in that careful, unhurried way she had, and then she sat down on the top step and set the papers beside her and seemed to decide, without saying so, that she was not in a particular hurry to go anywhere. I sat down on the step below her. The cold came up through the concrete immediately, and the air smelled like someone nearby was burning wood, and the street was doing the quiet thing it does in Harrisburg on a weeknight in November when most people have already gone inside. She told me about the feeding table, not the version you'd put in a grant application, the real one. She had started it 3 years ago after leaving a desk job at an insurance firm that had been, in her words, slowly removing her will to be alive. The church had offered the space in exchange for her running there after school hours, which she had agreed to, which had turned out to mean she was working 2 jobs for the compensation of 0. The first grant had come through 8 months in, enough to buy real equipment, a chest freezer, a second rolling cart, and then it hadn't been renewed, and the chest freezer had developed a sound in its motor like a large animal trying to escape, and the rolling cart now had a pull to the left that required constant correction, and the deacon had said he supported her fully, by which he had meant he would remember her in his prayers. She said all of this in the same tone, level, undecorated, the tone of a woman who has recited the facts of her own situation so many times they have worn smooth, like stones that started with edges. Then she said, "The city sent a notice last month. Code violation. Inadequate ventilation in the kitchen." She picked at a loose thread on her sleeve. "The kitchen has a window and an exhaust fan." I looked up the code. "We're compliant." I wrote back and said so. A pause. "Haven't heard anything since," which either means it went away or it's coming back bigger. "Which do you think?" She looked at me. "I think things like that don't usually just go away." She was right. I knew she was right. I also knew things about code enforcement procedures that Jason Tyler had no business knowing, and I kept that knowledge exactly where it was, behind my back teeth, pressing against the inside of my jaw. "I could help," I said. She looked at me the way Marisol had looked at me the first evening, patient, assessing, waiting to find out if I was the kind of person who knew things or the kind who needed them explained. "With what?" she said. Not unkindly, just factual. Her eyes had already taken in the jacket, the watch, the general presentation of a man who counts his change. Help doesn't always look like money. She was quiet for long enough that I could hear a car 3 streets over and the faint scratch of something, a branch, maybe against the side of the building, and the particular quality of silence that falls between 2 people when one of them is deciding whether to believe the other. "In my experience," she said finally, "it mostly does." She didn't say it with bitterness. She said it the way she said everything, like she was reading the weather report, like it was just a fact about the climate that she had learned to dress for. And that was the thing that went directly through my ribs without stopping. Not the words themselves, but the absence of complaint in them. The complete matter-of-factness of a woman who has been disappointed enough times that she has stopped marking the occasions. I did not argue with her. There was nothing to argue. Jason Tyler had nothing to offer. That was the architecture of the situation, and I had built it, and I lived inside it, and the walls were exactly where I had put them. I came back the following evening anyway. She was already inside when I arrived, through the side door, and Marisol was sitting on the front steps doing homework with a flashlight, even though the porch light was working, because, As she explained without looking up, the porch light buzzed, and the buzzing bothered her focus. I sat on the lower step and waited. 20 minutes later, the door opened, and she came out with 2 cups, the kind from a gas station, foam, the lids pressed on at a slight angle. She held one out without a word. I took it. The coffee was terrible. It tasted like it had been made from instructions rather than intention. I drank all of it. She sat beside me, and we watched Marisol finish her homework, and the street did its quiet November thing, and neither of us said anything for a while, and the nothing we said was not uncomfortable. When she got up to go back inside, she paused at the door. "Again tomorrow," she said. It was not an invitation exactly. It was more like a question she was asking herself out loud, checking whether the thing she'd noticed was going to hold, testing the weight of it before she put anything on it. "Yes," I said. She nodded once and went inside. The door closed. I sat on the steps for another few minutes in the cold with the empty cup in my hand, and the streetlight overhead had a flicker in it that came and went, and somewhere in the middle of 3 centuries of learning not to want things I could not keep, something was very quietly going wrong. The thing about small power is that it knows exactly where to apply pressure. Brent Okafor arrived on a Tuesday with a clipboard and the particular walk of a man who has been given just enough authority to enjoy using it. Not swagger, something more deliberate than that. The measured pace of someone who wants you to watch him coming and have time to get uncomfortable before he arrives. He was mid-40s, a city enforcement badge on a lanyard, a pen already in his hand like he'd started writing before he'd walked in the door. Jenner met him at the top of the basement stairs. I was in the hallway with a mop I had no reason to have, because I had started finding reasons to be in the building on evenings the feeding table ran, and I had not examined that decision too closely. I watched her face do the thing I had seen it do before. Go still, then deliberate, then carefully neutral in the specific way of a woman who has learned that any visible feeling will be used against her. She smiled. The smile was correct in every technical detail. "Mr. Okafor," she said. We weren't expecting a follow-up. "Routine," he said, already moving past her toward the kitchen. He was in there for 11 minutes. I counted. He opened cabinets he had no documented reason to open. He ran his finger along the top of the exhaust hood and held it up and looked at it like it meant something, though Jenner had cleaned that hood 2 days ago. I had seen her do it, standing on a step stool with a cloth and a spray bottle, at 6 in the morning before the children arrived. He wrote things down. He did not tell her what he was writing. When he came out, he said there were additional concerns. He used the word additional with the care of a man who had chosen it precisely because it implied a previous list she was already behind on. Jenner said, "Can you send me the specifics in writing?" He said he'd be in touch. He left. The basement was quiet after that. Jenner stood at the kitchen door for a moment, not moving, her hand flat against the frame. Then she went back to the stove and picked up the ladle and resumed stirring something that did not need stirring. I brought in the extra chairs from the storage room. She didn't ask me to. I did it because it was a thing that needed doing and because standing in the hallway with a mop while she held herself together with both hands was not something I was willing to keep doing. She didn't thank me. She handed me a dish towel and pointed at the cart. We worked in parallel for a while without speaking, and the silence was the useful kind. And the children arrived at 5:30, and Theo said confirmed at the menu board, and Marisol told a boy named Garrett that he was sitting in her chair, which he was, and the room filled up the way it always did, with noise and the smell of something good and the particular looseness of children who have learned that this room is safe. Brent came back the following Thursday. This time I was not in the building. I had my shift at the complex on her street. And by the time I got to Verbaca Street, the children were gone, and the lights in the basement were off, and Jenner was sitting on the front steps with her coffee cup, and the particular stillness of someone who has been running an argument inside their own head since the previous evening and has not found a verdict. I sat down beside her. She did not say anything for long enough that I stopped expecting her to and just sat with her in the cold, the streetlight doing its intermittent flicker above us, the city running its quiet Tuesday night, sounds around us like background noise in a room where the important thing was happening without sound. Then she said, "He came back." "I know." I saw the light was off. Another silence. "He came alone this time." Her voice was level. It was doing the weather report thing, reciting facts at a careful distance from what the facts meant. After the kids left, he said, a pause. The pause had a shape to it. He said there were ways to make the violations go away. For people who were willing to be flexible. I did not say anything. He was standing close. Not threatening. Just close in the way that's supposed to make you feel like you're the one misreading it, so that if you say something, you're the problem. She picked at the edge of her coffee cup lid with her thumbnail. Back and forth. Back and forth. I told him to leave. Did he? Eventually, the streetlight flickered. Held. Flickered again. I was aware of my hands. Specifically of how still they were. Resting on my knees, perfectly flat. The way hands go still when the rest of the body is working very hard to contain something that does not want to be contained. 3 centuries of knowing what to do with men, like Brent Okafor. 3 centuries of resources and reach and the specific, cold efficiency of a man who has dealt with this particular species of small cruelty so many times he could dismantle it before breakfast. Jason Tyler had none of that. Jason Tyler had 2 hands on his knees and a mop at a complex on her street and a $12 watch that kept slightly bad time. He shouldn't talk to you like that, I said. The words came out quieter than I intended. Jenner looked at me. For a moment, her face was not doing the careful thing. It was just her face, tired and clear-eyed, and carrying something she had been carrying a long time. Men like that always do, she said. The trick is not letting them see it landed. She looked back at the street. The coffee cup lid. Back and forth. Back and forth. My hands did not move. That stillness cost me more than anything Jason Tyler had given up so far. More than the room. More than the mop. More than counting change in front of women who were deciding I wasn't worth the math. This was a different kind of cost. The kind that leaves a mark you can feel from the inside. Right behind the sternum, in the place where a man keeps the things he refuses to say out loud. I kept paying it. I sat beside her until she was ready to go in, and then I walked back to the row house on Derry Street. And I did not sleep. I did not call Priscilla. And I sat in the dark of that room with the mop leaning against the wall and understood, with a clarity that 3 centuries had not prepared me for, that the experiment was over. What I was doing now was something else entirely. The night of the feeding table celebration, Marisol's brother had his own seat. That was the thing I kept coming back to afterward when everything else was noise. He was 5 years old, and his name was Reuben, and he sat in the chair beside Marisol with both hands on the table and looked at the plate in front of him with the concentrated attention of a child who has learned not to reach until he's sure the thing is actually for him. Marisol put a napkin in his lap with the authority of someone who has been waiting a long time to do that specific task. Theo's menu board had 3 items circled in red marker. The plastic tablecloths were taped down at the corners so they wouldn't shift. Jenner had been setting up since 2 in the afternoon. I had been there since 2:15, and at some point in the early evening, she had looked across the room at me. Just once, just for a second too long, and then looked away first. I kept my face where it was. I kept doing what I was doing. My chest was a different matter. What I had done to Brent Okafor had taken 9 days and left no fingerprints that Jason Tyler could have made. I had called Priscilla from a payphone. I had given her a name and a badge number and asked for everything: financial records, inspection logs, the full history of code actions against properties in this zip code over the previous 4 years. What came back, delivered to a dead drop at a storage unit off the interstate, was a file thick enough to constitute its own argument. Brent had been running a pattern for 6 years. Incremental citations against small operators, mostly women, mostly programs without legal representation, followed by private visits, followed by offers. 2 of the women had made formal complaints. Both complaints had been quietly routed to a supervisor who shared a last name with Brent's wife. I had sent a file to a reporter named Carla Thiessen at the Patriot News, who covered municipal corruption with the focused patience of someone who takes it personally. I had sent it anonymously. I had been careful. I had not been careful enough. Carla ran the story on a Wednesday. By Thursday, the city had opened a review. By Friday, Brent Okafor was on administrative leave, and 2 women who had signed settlement agreements were talking to a lawyer about whether those agreements would hold. By Saturday, Carla Thiessen had a question she could not answer. The documents she had received were forensic quality, sourced, cross-referenced, organized in a way that suggested resources no anonymous tipster should have. She had traced the dead drop. She had found a security camera. She had a description of a man in a work jacket who did not move like a man in a work jacket. She called Jenner. I did not know this until Jenner came to find me. It was a Sunday evening, cold enough that my breath showed, and I was walking back from the corner store on Derry Street with a Starbucks cup in each hand. I'd started bringing her coffee on Sunday evenings, the good kind, because Jason Tyler's cover story allowed for one small extravagance, and I had decided it was this. I saw her half a block away, standing outside the row house, and she was holding her phone, and her face was the face of a woman who has been sitting with a completed puzzle for some hours and has come to confirm the last piece. She did not say hello. She said, "A reporter called me about the documents that took down Brent." A pause. She couldn't find Jason Tyler. No records before 4 months ago. No history. Nothing. Another pause, this one longer, the kind that takes up space in the air between 2 people. She asked me if I knew who you really were. The Starbucks cups were warm in my hands. "Do you?" she said. I could hear the traffic signal clicking at the corner. I could hear my own breathing. I could not hear hers, which meant she was holding it. I told her, not carefully, not in the ordered, managed way I had rehearsed in the dark of the row house on the nights when I had known this moment was coming. I told her the way you tell the truth when you have been carrying it so long your arms have gone numb. All of it without structure, the name, the money, the 3 centuries, the women who had used him, the experiment, the identity, the whole constructed shape of the lie I had been living inside for 4 months. I told her about Marisol on the sidewalk pointing me toward the church. I told her about sitting in that basement and watching Theo say confirmed and understanding that this was the realest room I had been in for longer than I could properly account for. I told her I had come to find out if anyone could see me without the weight of what I carried. I told her she had. The silence that followed was not the useful kind. She looked at me for a long time. The cold was working its way through her jacket, and she was not adjusting for it, not pulling it tighter, just standing there with her arms at her sides and her eyes doing the arithmetic, going back through every conversation, every evening on the steps, every gas station coffee and cornbread, and again, recalculating each one for the variable she hadn't known was present. "You tested me," she said. "Jenner, you built a fake life so you could run an experiment on women." Her voice was not raised. That was the worst part. It was level and clear, the weather report voice, but underneath it was something that was not level at all, something pressing up against the surface from below. And I was one of them. I was a subject, and I passed, apparently. The fat woman who can't get anyone to stay was kind to the fake poor man. She pressed her hand against her mouth for a moment, took it away. "Do you understand what that sounds like from here?" I did. I did not say so. There was nothing to say that was not still, in some form, self-serving, and she had given me enough of herself that she deserved better than that. "I need you to leave," she said. I left. I walked back down Dairy Street with one Starbucks cup in my hand. Still warm, still full, the one I had brought for her. And the city made its Sunday evening sounds around me, entirely indifferent, and I understood with the particular clarity a man who has just lost the only thing that mattered that $300 billion and 3 centuries of survival had not, in the end, made me any harder to break. The cup stayed warm for a long time. She never took it. There are other women in this city who understand something about what I'm describing, not because they've lived this exact story, but because they know what it is to be seen by something old and certain and impossible, and to stand there deciding whether to believe it. We don't talk about it out loud, but I recognize them sometimes in the grocery store, on the bus. The particular way a woman holds herself when she's been changed by something she can't explain. That look, I know it. I wear it too. There's something about a story like this, the way it gets under the skin and stays there. If you felt something here, if some part of this is still sitting with you, there are others. Women who understand this particular kind of weight. Stories like this one, waiting. Subscribe so they can find you. That's all. No obligation. Just don't let this feeling slip away without somewhere to take it.